The howling wind carried more than snow across the desolate Wyoming plains on that bitter December night in 1876. It carried destiny toward Yates Harrington's small ranch just outside Jefferson, a struggling settlement barely holding its ground against the harsh frontier conditions. Yates pulled his sheepskin coat tighter around his broad shoulders, squinting against the stinging snow as he forced his way through knee-deep drifts toward the barn. His cattle needed tending, blizzard or not. At 32, he'd grown accustomed to the solitary life, finding peace in the daily rhythms of ranching despite the constant struggle. 10 years in Jefferson had hardened him against both the elements and disappointment. "Easy there, Samson," he murmured to his agitated horse, who whinnied anxiously, stomping his hooves on the wooden barn floor. The animal's behavior struck Yates as unusual. "What's got you spooked, boy?" The horse jerked his head toward the barn door, ears pricked forward. Yates frowned, straining to hear over the howling wind. A sound faint but distinct reached him through the storm's fury. A cry. Human, not animal, grabbing his rifle and a lantern, Yates ventured back into the blizzard, following Samson's instinct. The cry came again, weaker this time from the edge of his property where the road disappeared into drifts nearly waist-high. "Hello," he called, voice lost in the wind. "Anyone there?" The lantern's glow caught something dark against the snow, a wagon, half buried and tilted dangerously to one side, a broken wheel jutting from the whiteness. Beside it, a horse lay motionless, already stiffening in the cold. "Dear God," Yates breathed, approaching cautiously. No outlaw would be fool enough to travel in this weather, but caution had kept him alive this long. Inside the wagon, he found tragedy. A woman, beautiful even in death, her skin blue-tinged and frozen, clutched 2 small bundles to her chest. Her eyes stared sightlessly at the canvas ceiling, frost glistening on her lashes. Yates removed his hat in silent reverence, then froze as one of the bundles moved. Quickly setting down his rifle, he gently pried the stiff arms away from what he now realized were children twins, no more than a year old, somehow still clinging to life despite the cold that had claimed their mother. "How in heaven's name?" he whispered, amazement momentarily overcoming his practical nature. They wouldn't last much longer in this cold. Decision made, Yates tucked both infants inside his coat, their tiny bodies trembling against his chest, and turned toward home. The journey back seemed eternal, his steps labored through deepening snow. Inside his cabin, Yates worked feverishly, stoking the fire to blazing before carefully unwrapping the children, a boy and a girl, their faces nearly identical, with wisps of auburn hair and skin pale from cold but slowly pinking in the warmth. He warmed milk from his stores, coaxing the precious liquid between their tiny lips using a clean handkerchief. The girl accepted it eagerly, but the boy seemed weaker, less responsive. "Come on, little one," Yates urged, genuine fear gripping him. "You've made it this far." As if hearing his plea, the boy's eyes fluttered open, revealing irises of startling blue just like his sister's. Something fierce and protective surged through Yates as those innocent eyes locked with his. "My home is now yours," he whispered, the words emerging unbidden yet feeling absolutely right. "I promise you that." He knew nothing about raising children, especially not one so small. Jefferson had a doctor, but reaching town in this blizzard was impossible. For tonight at least, their survival rested entirely in his rough, calloused hands. Morning brought clear skies and the realization that Yates's life had irrevocably changed. The twins, having survived the night, now slept peacefully in his bed, cushioned by blankets and watched over by his faithful border collie, Rusty. The woman's body couldn't wait. With the ground frozen solid, Yates constructed a temporary resting place in a storage shed, promising the silent figure that come spring, he'd give her a proper burial. Searching through the wagon's contents revealed little some women's clothing, basic provisions, and a small wooden box containing a locket with the initials KR engraved on its surface. Inside was a tiny portrait of the woman, smiling in happier times, and a lock of her auburn hair. No identification, no destination, no hint of the twins' names. Catherine, Kathleen. Yates wondered aloud, studying the locket. "KR, whoever you were, I'll make sure your children know of you." The blizzard had passed, but the snow remained deep, and Yates knew he needed help. Bundling the infants as best he could, he harnessed Samson to his sturdy sleigh and set out for Jefferson, the closest thing to civilization for 30 miles. Jefferson consisted of little more than a main street with essential businesses: general store, saloon, blacksmith, and importantly, a small medical practice run by Dr. Emmett Walsh. The town had grown modestly since its establishment 15 years earlier, serving the needs of ranchers, railroad workers, and the occasional traveler passing through to more promising territories. "Good heavens, Harrington, Doctor!" Walsh exclaimed when Yates entered his office carrying his precious cargo. "What have you got there?" "Found them last night," Yates explained, unwrapping the bundles. "Their mother didn't make it." The doctor's examination was thorough, his expression grave, then gradually lightening. "It's nothing short of miraculous these little ones survived. They're dehydrated but otherwise healthy. I'd put them at about 10 months old." "They need names," Yates said, watching as the twins curled toward each other even in sleep, their bond already evident. "That's assuming you're keeping them," the doctor replied carefully. Yates's response came without hesitation. "They're mine now." Word spread quickly through Jefferson. By midday, Yates found himself surrounded by the town's womenfolk at the general store, receiving more advice than he could possibly remember, along with donations of baby clothing, milk bottles, and other necessities he hadn't known existed. "Amber and Adam," suggested elderly Mrs. Fincher, the storekeeper's wife. "Good, strong names." Yates shook his head, thinking of the locket. "The girl will be Catherine Kate for short, and the boy—" He considered the strength it had taken for these children to survive. "Daniel, after my father, Catherine and Daniel Harrington." The names felt right. "You cannot possibly manage 2 infants alone on that ranch of yours," declared Beatrice Holloway, the town's self-appointed matriarch. "You need a wife, Mr. Harrington." Yates bristled. "What I need is formula and diapers, madam, not matchmaking." "Actually," interjected Thomas Reed, the store owner, "what you really need is a wet nurse. Formula's fine in a pinch, but babies this young need mother's milk." Reed's words silenced the group momentarily, the practical truth of his statement undeniable. Beatrice recovered first. "The Rollins girl, Karina, she lost her baby last month. She might be willing." Yates had only passing familiarity with Karina Rollins. Widowed young when her husband was killed in a mining accident, she lived in a small cabin at the edge of town. He'd tipped his hat to her a few times when their paths crossed, but little more. "Where might I find her?" he asked, adjusting Kate in his arms as she began to fuss. "I'll fetch her," Beatrice volunteered, already donning her coat. Karina Rollins arrived at the general store within the hour, her grief still evident in the shadows beneath her hazel eyes. At 23, she carried herself with the dignity of someone who had already weathered more of life's storms than seemed fair. Her chestnut hair was neatly pinned back, and despite her modest dress, there was an undeniable grace to her movements. When her eyes fell upon the twins, emotion flooded her face: pain, longing, and something softer that Yates couldn't quite name. "Mrs. Holloway explained your situation," she said quietly, her voice surprisingly melodious. "May I?" She held out her arms. Yates carefully transferred Kate to her, watching anxiously as Karina cradled the infant with practiced ease. "Hello, little one," she whispered, and to Yates's amazement, Kate immediately settled, blinking up at Karina with what almost seemed like recognition. "They need a mother's milk," Yates said, feeling suddenly awkward. "I understand if it's too painful after your loss, but I'll help you," Karina interrupted, her gaze still on Kate's face. "For them." Relief washed over Yates, followed quickly by a new complication. "Thank you, but my ranch is miles out of town." "The journey twice daily would be, I'll stay at your ranch," she stated simply, "until they're weaned or other arrangements are made." The arrangement raised eyebrows throughout Jefferson, but necessity overrode propriety. That evening, Yates found himself driving his sleigh back to the ranch with Karina seated beside him, the twins bundled between them, and a trunk of her belongings tied securely behind. "It's not much," he said as his cabin came into view, suddenly conscious of its utilitarian simplicity. But it's warm and sound. It's more than many have, Karina replied diplomatically. Inside, Yates showed her to his bedroom, which he had hurriedly prepared for her use, explaining that he would sleep in the small adjoining room he used as an office. If she found the arrangement improper, she gave no indication, her focus entirely on the twins' needs. That first night established a pattern that would carry them through the winter months. Karina tended to the twins with a gentle efficiency that both impressed and humbled Yates. He watched her sing to them, bathe their tiny bodies, and nurse them with such tender care that his chest ached with gratitude and something deeper he wasn't ready to name. For her part, Karina observed Yates with quiet curiosity. He wasn't what she had expected. Despite his imposing height and weathered exterior, he handled the twins with surprising gentleness, his massive hands capable of incredible delicacy when changing their diapers or rocking them to sleep. He spoke to them constantly, in a low, rumbling voice that seemed to soothe them as effectively as her lullabies. January gave way to February, and the four of them settled into an unexpected harmony. Yates continued his ranching duties while Karina maintained the household and cared for the twins. In the evenings, they would sit before the fire, the children sleeping nearby, and talk tentatively at first, then with increasing openness. He learned that she had come west with her husband from Ohio 3 years earlier, chasing the promise of mining fortunes that never materialized. She had been pregnant twice before losing her husband. The first ended in early miscarriage, and the second, a son, had lived only 2 weeks after a difficult birth. "I thought God was punishing me," she admitted one night, firelight casting soft shadows across her face. "For some sin I couldn't identify. I don't believe in that kind of God," Yates replied, poking at the fire. "The one I believe in doesn't work that way. And what kind does he work?" There was no challenge in her question, only genuine curiosity. Yates was silent for a long moment. "The kind that puts children in need on the path of those who need children," he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. Karina's eyes glistened in the firelight, but she said nothing more, simply reaching out to touch his hand briefly before turning her attention back to the sleeping twins. February's bitter cold gave way to March's unpredictable temperament. On a surprisingly mild day, Yates harnessed Samson to fulfill his promise to the twins' mother. With Karina's help, they prepared a proper grave on a gentle rise overlooking the eastern pasture, where wildflowers would bloom in the coming months. "We don't know your name," Yates said as they stood beside the freshly turned earth, the twins bundled in Karina's arms. "But your children will know you loved them enough to protect them with your last breath. May you find peace," Karina added softly, "knowing they are loved and cherished." As they turned to walk back to the cabin, Daniel began to fuss, his tiny face scrunching in discontent. Yates reached for him automatically, and Karina transferred the boy to his arms without hesitation. Their movements so synchronized it was as if they'd been caring for children together for years, rather than months. "He knows his pa," Karina observed with a small smile, then immediately looked stricken. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have, no," Yates interrupted gently. "I am their pa now in all the ways that matter." Something shifted between them that day, a quiet acknowledgement of their unusual situation, evolving into something more permanent than either had initially imagined. As March progressed, bringing the first hints of spring to the Wyoming landscape, Karina became increasingly aware of how deeply she had come to care for Yates. It wasn't simply gratitude for his kindness or appreciation for his integrity. There was something fundamentally good about him that drew her like a flower to the sun. She found excuses to watch him work, the way his shoulders flexed as he chopped wood, how gently he handled newborn calves during the spring birthing, the patience with which he trained his horses. Even more affecting was witnessing his growing bond with the twins, how he invented silly games that made them giggle, how naturally he had taken to fatherhood despite having no experience. Yates, for his part, found himself inventing reasons to return to the cabin throughout the day to check on the twins, he told himself, though his eyes inevitably sought Karina first. The cabin had transformed under her care, becoming truly a home rather than merely shelter. She had sewn curtains for the windows from fabric ordered from the general store, arranged wildflowers in mason jars, and filled the spaces with the scents of fresh bread and stews that made his mouth water after a day's hard work. He caught himself watching her when she wasn't aware the graceful movement of her hands as she kneaded dough, the way sunlight caught in her hair when she stepped outside, the gentle curve of her smile when the twins did something new. She was healing before his eyes, her grief gradually giving way to a quiet joy that humbled him to witness. One evening in early April, as a gentle rain pattered against the windows, Yates returned from the barn to find Karina seated before the fire, a sleeping twin cradled in each arm. The domestic tranquility of the scene struck him with such force that he stopped in the doorway, suddenly aware of how completely his life had been transformed. "They waited for you," Karina said softly, looking up at him with a smile. But the battle against sleep was ultimately lost. Yates crossed to her, kneeling to stroke Daniel's cheek with one finger. "They're growing so fast," he marveled. "Seems like just yesterday they were half this size." "They'll be walking before we know it," Karina agreed. She hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking, they're nearly weaned now." Something cold settled in Yates's stomach. "Yes," he managed, not meeting her eyes. "Our arrangement was only until then," she continued, her voice carefully neutral. "I should probably return to town soon." The thought of her leaving of the cabin, returning to its former emptiness, of raising the twins without her wisdom and warmth was suddenly unbearable. Yates looked up, finding her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Unless." She began, then faltered. "Unless." He prompted, heart suddenly hammering. "Unless there's reason for me to stay." The moment hung between them, fragile as blown glass. Yates reached out, not to the twins but to Karina, his calloused fingers gently touching her cheek. "I can think of 1,000 reasons," he said quietly. "But only one that matters." Her eyes widened. "And what's that?" "I've fallen in love with you, Karina Rawlins," he confessed, the words both terrifying and liberating. "I love how you sing to the twins. I love how you hum when you're kneading bread. I love your strength and your kindness. And I'm asking, hoping that you might consider making this arrangement permanent." Tears filled her eyes, but her smile was radiant. "I was so afraid," she whispered. "Afraid you saw me only as the twins' nurse, afraid to hope for more." "You're so much more than that," Yates insisted. "To them." "To me. I love you too," she said, the words emerging on a half-laugh, half-sob. "I think I have almost from the beginning." Careful not to disturb the sleeping twins, Yates leaned forward and kissed her tentatively at first, then with growing confidence as she responded. When they parted, both were smiling, the promise of their future together as bright as the morning sun after the longest night. They were married 2 weeks later in Jefferson's small church, the twins dressed in their finest for the occasion, the entire town turning out to witness the union that most had predicted from the moment Karina moved to Yates's ranch. Dr. Walsh stood as Yates's best man, while Beatrice Holloway, vindicated in her matchmaking instincts, proudly held Kate during the ceremony. Spring gave way to summer, and the Harrington ranch flourished under the care of its expanded family. Yates's cattle business improved with Karina's practical suggestions for expanding into cheese making, utilizing the milk from their small dairy herd to create a product eagerly purchased by the growing number of settlers passing through Jefferson. The twins thrived, developing distinct personalities that delighted their adoptive parents. Kate proved to be fearless and inquisitive, constantly exploring her surroundings with determined energy, while Daniel was more thoughtful and observant, watching the world with serious consideration before venturing into new experiences. Their first words came within days of each other, Pa from Daniel and Ma from Kate, bringing tears to both Yates and Karina's eyes. "They truly are ours now," Karina whispered as Daniel toddled across the cabin floor toward Yates's outstretched arms. "They always were," Yates replied, catching his son and swinging him high, eliciting delighted giggles. "From the moment I found them." As autumn painted the surrounding hills in brilliant shades of gold and crimson, Karina shared news that completed their family circle. She was expecting a child of their own. "Are you certain?" Yates asked, joy warring with concern given her previous losses. "Doctor." "Walsh confirmed it yesterday," she assured him, her hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "He says everything appears healthy and with proper care." Yates gathered her into his arms, mindful of her condition. "We'll take every precaution," he promised, "whatever you need." Their son, Joseph Harrington, was born on a crisp April morning in 1878, healthy and strong, with Yates's dark hair and Karina's hazel eyes. The twins, now nearly 2.5, regarded their new brother with solemn curiosity before Kate declared him cute, and Daniel asked if he could play horsey yet. Life settled into new rhythms as the children grew. Yates expanded the cabin, adding proper bedrooms and a larger kitchen to accommodate their growing family. Karina planted a vegetable garden that became the envy of neighboring ranches, and her preserves won ribbons at the county fair each autumn. The summer of 1880 brought another, blessing a daughter they named Sarah, completing their family of 6. With 4 children under 5 years old, the Harrington household was busy, noisy, and perpetually in motion. But Yates and Karina handled the chaos with practiced teamwork and unwavering devotion. As the children grew, so did the ranch's prosperity. By 1885, Yates had expanded his herd considerably and built a new barn with help from neighboring ranchers. Jefferson had grown as well, becoming an important stop on the railway line that now connected Wyoming more efficiently to eastern markets. The twins were nearly 10 now, attending the town school alongside Joseph, who at 7 was already showing a remarkable aptitude for numbers. 5-year-old Sarah remained at home with Karina, helping with the chickens and learning to sew with impressive dexterity for one so young. It was during this period of settled contentment that the past unexpectedly resurfaced. A letter arrived from Denver, addressed to the family caring for the Ross twins. Inside was a formal inquiry from a law firm representing one Theodore Ross, who claimed to be searching for his brother's children, believed to have been traveling with their mother through Wyoming some years earlier. "Ross," Karina murmured, glancing at the locket they had kept all these years. "K.R. Catherine Ross." The letter indicated that the children's father, James Ross, had died in a mining accident shortly before their mother, Elizabeth, had set out for Oregon to live with relatives. When no word came of her arrival, the family had begun a search that had taken years to reach Jefferson. "They have family," Yates said quietly, the letter heavy in his hands. "Blood kin with a right to know them." "We are their family," Karina replied, a fierceness in her voice he rarely heard. "We've raised them, loved them, given them everything a family should. And we always will be," Yates assured her, taking her hand. "But they deserve to know their history, where they came from, and this Theodore Ross deserves to know his niece and nephew are alive and well." The decision to respond to the letter was difficult, but they felt morally necessary. Yates wrote explaining how he had found the twins, adopted them legally, which he had done through the territorial court shortly after marrying Karina, and raised them as his own. He invited Theodore Ross to visit Jefferson if he wished to meet the children, but made it clear they were Harringtons now, loved and established in their home. The reply came swifter than expected. Theodore Ross would arrive by train the following month, expressing gratitude for the Harringtons' care and assuring them he had no intention of disrupting the children's lives. Telling the twins about their origins was perhaps the hardest conversation Yates and Karina had ever faced. They had never hidden the fact that Kate and Daniel were adopted, but the children had been too young to remember any life before the ranch. "Does this mean we have to leave?" Daniel asked, his blue eyes so like his birth mother's wide with apprehension. "Absolutely not," Yates said firmly. "You are our children now and always. This is your home." "But this man, he's really our uncle?" Kate questioned, ever practical. "By blood, yes," Karina explained gently, "and he's traveled a long way to meet you, but meeting him doesn't change who you are or where you belong." Theodore Ross arrived in Jefferson on a cool September afternoon in 1885. He was a distinguished man in his 50s, with the same striking blue eyes as the twins and a gentle manner that put the children at ease. Over dinner at the ranch, he shared stories of his brother and Elizabeth, showing the twins' daguerreotypes of their birth parents and answering their curious questions with patient honesty. "You've done a remarkable thing, Mr. and Mrs. Harrington," he said later that evening after the children had been put to bed. "These children couldn't have asked for better parents had they chosen you themselves." "They're easy to love," Karina replied simply. "Indeed." Theodore sipped the coffee Karina had served. "I want to be clear about my intentions. I have no wish to remove the children from your care. You are their parents in all the ways that truly matter." Relief flooded through Yates, though he'd tried to prepare himself for any outcome. "Thank you for that. However," Theodore continued, "I would like to remain part of their lives if you're amenable, perhaps correspondence, visits when possible, and—" He hesitated. "There is a matter of their inheritance." It transpired that James Ross had been more successful than his brother initially realized. Investments made before his death had matured significantly, and as his only heirs, Kate and Daniel were entitled to substantial funds money that could provide for their education and future security. "We don't want their money," Yates began, but Theodore raised a hand. "It's not about what you want, Mr. Harrington. It's about what's rightfully theirs. I suggest a trust, accessible when they reach adulthood, with you as trustees until then." The arrangement was eventually agreed upon, with the addition that Joseph and Sarah would receive equal educational opportunities through a separate fund Theodore established as a gesture of gratitude to the family that had saved his niece and nephew. Theodore's visit lasted a week, during which he became Uncle Theo to all 4 Harrington children. Before departing, he promised to return the following summer and to write regularly in between. "You've given me back a piece of my family I thought was lost forever," he told Yates and Karina as they stood on the train platform. "I can never repay that gift. Just be good to them," Yates replied, shaking the man's hand. "That's all we ask." As the years passed, the unexpected addition of Theodore Ross to their family circle proved to be yet another blessing. His annual visits became eagerly anticipated events, bringing stories, gifts, and a connection to the twins' heritage that enriched rather than diminished their bond with the Harringtons. The children grew, as children do, each developing their own path. Kate, with her fearless spirit and quick mind, announced at 16 her intention to become a doctor, inspired by Dr. Walsh's care for the community. Daniel, quieter but equally determined, showed a remarkable talent for engineering, constantly designing improvements for the ranch's operations. Joseph, inheriting his father's way with animals, seemed destined to continue the ranching tradition, while Sarah revealed an artistic temperament that transformed everything she touched into something beautiful. With Theodore's educational fund and their own prospering business, Yates and Karina were able to support each child's ambitions. Kate was accepted to medical school in Denver in 1893, one of only 3 women in her class, with Daniel following to study at the School of Mines in Golden. "I never imagined our children would go so far," Karina confessed to Yates the night after they had put Kate on the train, her eyes damp but proud. "Nor that they'd make us so proud," Yates agreed, his own voice rough with emotion. At 49, his dark hair was now liberally streaked with silver, and the Wyoming winters had etched permanent lines around his eyes, but he remained as strong and vital as ever. Karina, at 40, had retained her graceful beauty, though childbirth and years of ranch work had softened her figure and added character to her face. To Yates, she grew more beautiful with each passing year, their love deepening like a river carving its essential path through stone. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly, turning to him in the lamplight. "Taking on 2 orphan babies when you were barely making ends meet yourself?" Yates considered the question seriously, as was his way. "I've regretted many things in my life," he finally answered. Harsh words spoken in anger, opportunities missed through caution, but those 2 children, finding them was the best thing that ever happened to me. He took her hand, bringing it to his lips. "It led me to you after all." Karina's smile was radiant. "My thoughts exactly." Their story might have ended there, with the satisfying conclusion of children grown and thriving, a marriage strong and true, a life well lived on land well tended. But there was yet another chapter to unfold. In the autumn of 1894, as Yates and Karina were adjusting to their quieter household with only Joseph and Sarah still at home, a letter arrived from Kate in Denver. Her medical studies were progressing well, but more importantly, she had met a professor of surgery named Andrew Bennett who had been impressed with her skills and, eventually, with her as a person. "He's asked me to marry him," she wrote, "and I've accepted. I know it's unconventional, pursuing both marriage and a medical career, but Andrew believes, as I do, that I needn't choose between them." The wedding was held the following spring in Jefferson, the entire town turning out once again to celebrate a Harrington milestone. Dr. Bennett, a dignified man in his mid-30s with kind eyes and impressive credentials, clearly adored Kate and, importantly, treated her intellect and ambitions with genuine respect. Daniel served as best man, having formed a close friendship with Andrew through Kate. At 20, he was the image of the father he had never known, tall and lean, with the same striking blue eyes that had first captured Yates's heart that snowy night so long ago. Not to be outdone, Daniel announced at the wedding reception that he had accepted a position with a railroad company that would allow him to implement his engineering designs while based in Cheyenne, close enough for frequent visits home. "You've raised remarkable children," Theodore Ross commented to Yates as they watched the celebration unfold. Now in his 60s, Theodore had become a beloved fixture in the family's life, his annual visits extended to include holidays and special occasions. "We all did," Yates replied, acknowledging the role Theodore had played in the twins' lives. "It takes a community to raise children right." The wisdom of that statement would prove especially true in the coming years as the extended Harrington family continued to grow and evolve. Kate and Andrew welcomed their first child, a daughter named Elizabeth after Kate's birth mother, in 1896. Daniel married Hannah Collins, the daughter of a Cheyenne banker, in 1897, and their son Michael arrived the following year. Joseph, after briefly considering prospects elsewhere, decided his heart belonged to the ranch and to Jefferson, where he eventually married Lily Watson, the schoolteacher who had come to town in 1898. Sarah, the youngest, pursued her artistic talents at a women's college in Boston before returning to Wyoming, where she established a successful millinery shop in the growing city of Cheyenne and married Robert Thornton, a local attorney. Through it all, the ranch remained the family's anchor, the place where they gathered for holidays and celebrations, where grandchildren learned to ride horses and heard the story of how their family began on a snowy night when a lonely cowboy found two tiny souls in need. As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, bringing automobiles and telephones even to remote Jefferson, Yates and Karina welcomed the changes while maintaining the values that had sustained them through decades of frontier life: hard work, unwavering love, and the belief that family was defined by heart rather than blood. On a golden autumn day in 1906, exactly 30 years after Yates had found the twins in that snow-covered wagon, the entire extended family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. 4 generations were present, from Theodore Ross, now a sprightly octogenarian, to Kate's newest grandchild, just 3 months old. After dinner, as the younger children played in the yard and the adults relaxed on the expanded porch that now wrapped around the substantial farmhouse, Daniel proposed a toast. "To the night that changed everything," he said, raising his glass. "And to the man who became our father by choice rather than chance." Yates, now 62 but still strong despite the arthritis that occasionally troubled his hands, stood beside Karina, his arm around her waist. "I made a promise that night," he reminded them, his voice still carrying the deep resonance they all associated with safety and home. "I said, 'My home is now yours. Little did I know how much you would all give me in return.'" "We gave you gray hair," Kate teased, her own auburn locks now showing the first silver strands. "And worry lines," added Daniel with a grin. "And grandchildren," Joseph contributed, holding his youngest on his hip. "And a lifetime of love," Karina concluded, reaching up to touch Yates's weathered face. A fair exchange, I'd say. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Yates looked out over his family, biological and chosen, related by blood and by love, and knew with absolute certainty that he had been blessed beyond measure. That night, after the celebrations had ended and the house had quieted, Yates and Karina stood on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky. "I never thought it would turn out this way," Karina admitted, leaning against his shoulder. "That night when Beatrice Holloway came to tell me about a rancher with orphaned twins, I was just trying to survive my grief. I never imagined finding such joy again." "Life has a way of surprising us," Yates replied, kissing the top of her head. "Sometimes with challenges we think will break us, sometimes with blessings we never thought to ask for. Like two babies in the snow," she murmured, "and the brave woman who helped me raise them," he added. They stood in comfortable silence, contemplating the journey that had brought them to this moment, the hardships and the triumphs, the tears and the laughter that had woven together to create a life richer than either could have envisioned. The future stretched before them still, with its inevitable changes and challenges. Their children would continue their own journeys, their grandchildren would grow, and the world would transform in ways they could scarcely imagine. But through it all, the foundation they had built would endure, a legacy of love that had begun with a simple act of compassion on a bitter winter night. "Come to bed, my love," Karina said finally, taking Yates's hand. "Tomorrow's another day." "Tomorrow," Yates agreed, following her inside to the home they had created together, and all the tomorrows after. In the years that followed, the Harrington legacy continued to flourish. The ranch passed to Joseph, who modernized its operations while maintaining the traditions his father had established. Kate became one of the region's most respected physicians, training a new generation of medical professionals with her husband at a hospital they founded in Denver. Daniel's engineering innovations revolutionized railroad safety across the Western Territories, while Sarah's artistic influence spread through her designs, and the art school she eventually established in Cheyenne. Theodore Ross lived to the remarkable age of 92, long enough to see Kate and Daniel's children begin successful lives of their own, a legacy he had once feared lost forever. Yates and Karina remained at the ranch, though they gradually relinquished its daily management to Joseph and Lily. They traveled occasionally to visit their far-flung family members, but always returned to the land that had witnessed their extraordinary journey from strangers to soulmates. In 1916, as the world was engulfed in the Great War, Yates suffered a stroke that left him partially paralyzed. True to her nature, Karina cared for him with unwavering devotion, reading to him daily and helping him outside to feel the sun on his face. Though his body had weakened, his mind remained sharp, and he delighted in the visits from children, grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren, who came to hear his stories of the early days. Karina would often find him watching the eastern pasture where, so many years earlier, they had buried the twins' mother. "I think she would be pleased," he said once, his speech slightly slurred from the stroke, "to see what became of her children." "I believe she knows," Karina replied, squeezing his hand. Yates Harrington passed peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1918, with Karina beside him and the window open to the sounds of calves bawling in the pasture, the eternal rhythm of ranch life he had loved so well. At his funeral, attended by what seemed like the entire population of Jefferson and the surrounding counties, Daniel spoke for the family. "My father wasn't my father by birth," he said, his voice steady despite his grief. "But he taught me everything about being a man, a husband, a father. He showed me that love isn't about blood, it's about choice. Every day he chose to love us, to guide us, to build something that would last beyond himself." Kate continued where her twin left off. "He found us on the worst night of our lives, though we were too young to know it. And with that simple act of compassion, he changed not just our destiny, but his own, and that of everyone whose lives we've touched since." Karina survived her husband by 8 years, remaining at the ranch surrounded by family until her peaceful passing in 1926. She was buried beside Yates in the family plot that now included Elizabeth Ross, the twins' birth mother, honored as the woman whose sacrifice had made their family possible. The Harrington Ranch continued to thrive through the 20th century, weathering the Great Depression, sending sons to fight in World War II, and adapting to the changing landscape of modern agriculture. What never changed was the family's commitment to the values Yates and Karina had instilled: integrity, compassion, and the belief that true family transcended biological connections. In 1976, on the centennial of that fateful night when Yates found the twins, his descendants, now numbering in the dozens and spread across the country in various professions and pursuits, gathered at the ranch, which remained in family hands despite the challenges of modern ranching. Kate and Daniel's grandchildren, now in their 70s, unveiled a memorial they had commissioned. A simple stone marker near the spot where the snow-covered wagon had been discovered, inscribed with words that told their family's origin story. On this spot in December 1876, a lonely cowboy named Yates Harrington found orphaned twins in a snowstorm and whispered, "My home is now yours." From that single act of compassion grew a family bound by love rather than blood, a legacy that continues to this day. May all who pass this way be reminded that family is created by love, sustained by commitment, and enriched by the choice to open our hearts to others. As the extended Harrington clan stood around the memorial, the youngest children playing nearby just as generations had before them, they were united by the knowledge that their family's remarkable journey from desperate circumstances to enduring legacy had begun with one man's decision to stop in a snowstorm and offer help to those in need. It was a legacy that would continue as long as the story was told, inspiring future generations to recognize that sometimes the most profound love stories begin not with romance, but with compassion, and that families created by choice can be as strong and lasting as any formed by birth. In Jefferson, Wyoming, the Harrington name remained synonymous with integrity, generosity, and the pioneer spirit that had built the American West. But to those who knew the full story, it represented something even more profound: the power of love to transform lives, create families, and build legacies that outlast the individuals who began them. And it all started with 7 simple words spoken in a moment of pure human connection: "My home is now yours."